Thank you and good morning everyone. The focus of my talk this morning is going to be to make the case for the importance and the criticality of international standards in blockchain and how they can exert very much a positive force on the development, the application and the acceptance of the technology, and in doing so encourage greater investment and greater innovation. And one of the key messages that I'd like to leave you with this morning is that standards are not about restricting or inhibiting innovation, they're about spurring on and encouraging greater innovation, and importantly they're about lowering the cost of innovation in an area of new technology. I'm also going to talk a bit about the pathway to developing international standards and also to encourage as many of you as possible to get involved in their development. Because the important thing to understand about international standards is they're not determined by a central authority sitting in Europe who decides that we should have standards and decides what should be in those standards. They're determined by a global consensus. There are more than 160 members involved in the ISO that are working on international standards today, and I'll talk about it more later, but there are more than 50 countries involved in the development of blockchain standards. It's very much a consensus-based process where it's involving the people that use and develop the technology. They're the people that are involved in setting the standards for the technology. I can also make the point that it's very clear to me that China is very much leading in the world in so many aspects of blockchain, particularly in consortium or private blockchains. China is already a very active member in the development of international standards. And again, one of my messages today is just to encourage that. It's really important that the second largest economy in the world, one of the leading countries in the development and use of blockchain in the world, plays a very leading role in the development of international standards so that they're relevant and they're accepted globally. I think it's been a really pivotal year or so for blockchain over the past 12 months in terms of the acceptance and, if you like, the acceptance by the mainstream, a much broader and diverse set of stakeholders who are learning about blockchain, who are investing in it and seeking to use it. There are, of course, still many skeptics who are very skeptical about the potential of blockchain, and there are many critics who still criticise some of the bumps along the road that invariably any new technology, any new innovation will go through. But it's very clear from some of the information in this chart that increasingly blockchain is being accepted by the mainstream. It's been invested in by the very largest corporations around the world, including here in China, and it's been studied by the central banks. The World Bank has just issued a new bond under the blockchain technology. Governments around the world, stock exchanges are all beginning to use the technology. And with that mainstream acceptance, as more mainstream actors, if you like, as more significant investment goes into the technology, as the technology increasingly impacts more countries and more people around the world, then it's very natural that the voice will grow louder for the adoption of international standards. I think one of the reasons why blockchain is becoming more mainstream is, whilst not everyone necessarily understands it in the broader economy, I think increasingly people see the potential of the technology. And when you look at truly innovative changes like the unique identification of digital assets, the birth of the token economy, the opportunity to establish new forms of trust, whether you understand the detailed technology or not, most people are starting to get their minds around the potential of this technology to change the world for the better. One of the challenges I find in this space, and this is one of the benefits of coming to a conference like today, is this area of technology is developing and changing so quickly. And so it's almost impossible to keep up with every new development, and it's almost equally challenging to give true meaning to that development. And one of the authors that I like following is a chap called Michael Casey. You may have read, some of you may have read his book on blockchain called The Truth Machine, and he also writes for CoinDesk. And I think he wrote a very recent article, it's a very interesting article, on the importance of best practices and standards. And I want to read this quote to you in one of his recent articles on blockchain. And he says the very concept of a censorship-resistant system tends to run counter to regulation. But it does mean those of us involved in developing this technology should encourage protocols, best practices, standards, and norms of behaviour that have at the core their interests of society at large. And that's what international standards seek to do. There are many different ways that standards can develop around technology. There can be those that are developed by a government or a central regulatory authority. There are those that can be developed by consensus, like the ISO and other similar bodies. And many are also developed through what you might call de facto or market means. And that's where often a product or a protocol or a particular type of technology gets almost dominant market share, either perhaps through first mover advantage or network effects, and so by de facto it becomes the standard that people follow. And you can look back over history, there are examples under all those categories of standards development where some standards have been very, very effective and others less so. There is a reasonable degree of academic literature that has been done on standards and the use of international standards in technology. And it does demonstrate that there are real benefits to bear. And you can cite some fairly common examples of this. If you recall the development of the personal computer and how standards, no matter how they were developed, helped design a more modular system that allowed for greater specialisation, it allowed for greater scale in terms of investment and development, and it also allowed for greater innovation in the individual components that made up the PC computer. And a lot of that happened because of the standards that existed. It can also reduce asymmetric switching costs when corporations are investing in technology, and very importantly, it can spur greater innovation by allowing for improved interoperability in the technology. And obviously that's a topic that's had a lot of discussion in this morning's presentations. One area that provides a really good example of international technology standards is those that have been developed for the international cellular phone. And on this chart I've listed some benefits that have arisen from the development of those standards. Those benefits are very significant and those benefits are very real, and they go well beyond us being able to use the same phone in different countries when we travel internationally. They include examples such as the capacity to achieve scale benefits for telcos that are investing billions and billions of dollars in new networks, and they also allow telcos to use the best technology no matter where that technology has been developed or innovated. And interestingly, I think this is why they're a very good example. Whether you're talking about 3G, 4G, or the soon-to-be 5G, the development of these standards has coped very effectively with areas of rapid deployment of new technology and also inconsistent deployment of that technology across different countries. So those that were developing the standards of 3G would have known at the time that in a reasonably short window, the next generation, the fourth generation of cellular phone standards would apply. But they've been able to develop those standards notwithstanding those rapid changes. And one thing they've been able to achieve or been able to do that is by requiring backwards compatibility. And so that means if you've got a 4G phone, it will also need to work in a 3G environment. And I understand chips in credit cards or payment cards use the same backward compatibility. So the reason I'm giving this as an example is there are very significant areas of technology standards that have been developed in very rapidly changing environments. In environments where there's been inconsistent adoption of the technology, yet the world's been able to develop those standards and so for improve the efficiency of investment and efficiency of innovation. One of the debates, I suppose, that gets argued or discussed in the development of standards in any new technology, and this is certainly the case for blockchain, is the timing of when you implement or develop new standards. And there are people that argue that it is far too early in the development of blockchain, given it's fairly early in its evolution, if you like, to develop standards. The risk of developing two standards too early, is that you tend to embody a technology that becomes out of date very quickly, and therefore you embody in the standards a poorer technology than you'd like because the standards have been set too early. And I think in blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, that is a risk. And some may argue, for example, that you should let the market decide. Let de facto standards evolve as they require. The challenge with de facto standards is they're not always developed in a very fair or consensual way. They're sometimes dominated by certain corporations or organisations, and they don't always lead to the best outcomes. And in my view, given the amount of investment that's going in this technology now across the world, there's a real case for a consensus approach to the development of international standards. And I want to give you a quick, fairly simple example of how de facto standards can sometimes lead to poor outcomes. And this relates to a very simple technology, but the one we still use today in terms of the keyboard configuration that Roman or Latin languages use on their keyboard of their computers. It was actually designed hundreds of years ago by a manufacturer of typewriters to slow down the speed of typing to stop the keys jamming. Yet it quickly became absorbed and used by typewriters around the world. And you can see from the information on that chart, it's a very inefficient configuration. And in fact, in the 1930s, a chap proposed the development of a new keyboard that would substantially increase the speed of typing, yet that never took off because the de facto standard, which was a poorer standard, had become so accepted. And so the point I'm making here is that while there is a real risk of developing international standards too early in a technology that's still evolving, what may happen in any event is de facto standards evolve through the market, and they aren't necessarily the best way of developing and bringing standards to bear. This next chart talks about some of the challenges faced by major users of the technology, and this was a study that was done by one of the universities in the United Kingdom in 2017. It's probably quickly becoming out of date, but it's interesting that many of the challenges that were commented in this study by businesses or technologists thinking about using or deploying the technology have been brought up by other speakers in the room. And I'd argue, whilst in many ways the development of the technology will need to occur to solve these problems, that international standards can also play a part in doing so. So let me talk a bit about the process that is operating to develop international standards by the OSO on blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. The aim of the Technical Committee 307, which is what it's called, is to meet the growing need for standardisation in this area by providing internationally agreed ways of working to improve security, privacy, scalability and interoperability, all the sort of challenges that have been discussed this morning, and do so in a way that encourages the technology's widespread adoption and greater innovation, enhanced governance and sustainable development. And on that slide, I've set out the major areas of work, and I'll provide a bit more detail in a moment on those. But the first meeting of the committee was held in Sydney in April 2017. We've since held meetings in London and Tokyo, and the next meeting will be held in Moscow next month in October. As I said in the introduction to my presentation this morning, there are nearly 50 countries participating in the development of the standards, including China, which, as I said, is playing a key role. We interact with other technical committees that work across ISO. There are many other committees that have developed technical or technology standards that are relevant. There are new standards being developed, like on IoT, where blockchain standards and IoT standards will need to be consistent and interact with each other. And then on the right-hand side of that slide, I've set out external liaisons. So they are other leading and relevant groups around the world, like the EC, SWIFT, the Ethereum Alliance, that are working and assisting on the development of the standards. So the next two charts just provide you with a bit more detailed information on the work that's been done by TC307 on developing international standards in this area. Now, in most respects, the work will lead to the development of a standard. And what a standard does, it sets out normative requirements or rules by which those agreeing to comply with the standard will operate, so you get a degree of order in any particular context. It's important to point out, though, that not all work done by a technical committee in developing international standards will necessarily lead to a standard. In fact, in some areas you may do a study and you might find that a standard is not appropriate or it's too early to roll out a standard. And so you also get what are called technical specifications, and they're like draft standards, if you like, that are released to the world to consider and apply if they would like, as a way of getting broader feedback. You also have what are called technical reports, and they're really discussion documents. So for example, you could take the topic of governance. They're a discussion document that really are trying to bring about the ways the world is perhaps governing blockchains, whether you're talking about private or public chains, off-chain, on-chain, whatever form of governance you're talking about. The technical report's not imposing a particular approach to governance, it's just bringing all the leading thinking together in one document on governance to be shared around the world, to be discussed and debated for some time in the future, potentially leading to a standard in that area. So a key part of being involved in this process is just the collaborative impact, the network, the involvement in discussion and debating where the technology is going. And of course, the advantage of these other technical reports, if you like, is they avoid going to standards too prematurely. One of the advantages, just go back one. One of the advantages of getting in the standards process, and I'll just go through this very quickly and then conclude, is that if you participate in the development of international standards, you do gain early access to information that might be quite important to the way a technology is developed or governed. It does also give your organisation a voice in the development of the international standard, and it helps to keep market access open because, as I said, it's developed in a very consensual way. So let me leave you with this final quote that talks about how standards generally spur innovation by bringing the best technological experience together and by forming a baseline upon which new standards can emerge. And as I said, I really would encourage you to get involved in the standards. You can do that by contacting your member organisation in China or the country you're from. You can contact Standards Australia, which is the governing secretariat for 307. You can contact me. It's really important for the benefit of the world that standards in this space develop, and they develop appropriately. And by appropriate, I mean they're developed through consensus, and that we have the leading people that are developing and using this technology inside the room, working on how these standards should progress. Because in the end, if we do this well, it can mean that blockchain is more accepted and has a greater positive impact on the world. Thanks very much.